For example, if users are starting on the home page and then going to a product page and then, looking at details and then from there adding it to their cart and checking out, you want to know that those are your key pages. And I'll get back to that. I'll kind of circle back there in a minute, but very important first step here to identify that funnel and understand what you want to look at going down.
Looking like a baddie, I show up and make them stop. Wanna know my name so badly, cause I run this whole block. Flip my hair, move my head, show the world I'm royalty. When I walk by, they be taking bows, cause they know I'm the queen, yeah.
Hello, my name is Amanda Davis, and I am a CRO strategist with Verifone. Today, I want to share a high-level overview of CRO audits with you. You could spend probably about an hour or more talking about each of these bullet points in this presentation, but I will keep it brief. My goal is to just convey the value of conducting CRO audits and sort of provide a beginning framework for you to build your own strategy and figure out what fits best for you, for your organization, or for your clients. So let's dive into the what, why, and how of CRO audits. So I will start by defining what a CRO audit is. The main goal of a CRO audit is to enhance the user experience, really just encourage more visitors to take the actions you want them to take, right? This could be a purchase, filling out a form, signing up for a newsletter. Overall, a CRO audit is a really, really valuable investment for any business to make that is trying to optimize their conversion rates, looking for better performance of their, any digital entity, whether it's a campaign or a website, and really just enhance the overall user experience. And so by going through this process of identifying and resolving any barriers to conversion, we can create a much more efficient space for our users to interact with and to complete the actions we want them to complete. And really that just helps drive the business outcomes that we're looking for. So that's really the idea behind a CRO audit. It's a comprehensive evaluation of your current state and where there are opportunities that could be, you might be missing out on for a conversion rate increase. So why should you conduct a CRO audit, right? Obviously, first is to improve conversion rates. CRO is conversion rate optimization, so that's why we're here. So that's obviously the primary reason. And again, we're just trying to get rid of any potential hindrances or barriers to conversion that users might be running into, identifying those and figuring out, how to remove them so we can improve conversion rates is really the reason that we're here. Next is to enhance user experience. I've already kind of mentioned this, but you really want to understand how your users interact with your site, with your client's site, where they're facing difficulties, where there's friction, and what can be done, what changes can be made to streamline their journey throughout your digital experience. Again, whether that's a shopping cart, your website, or a campaign or a landing page, something of that nature. All right, so another reason that we want to conduct CRO audits is to maximize return on investment. You're spending money to bring traffic to, your landing page, your website, your shopping cart, whatever it might be. You're spending money to bring traffic to that digital landscape, and increasing conversion rates means you get more out of it. So getting people to complete the action you want them to complete on that page, on that shopping cart, is getting you more for your investment in marketing dollars. So it just makes sense to do anything you can to optimize that user experience and to help visitors that you're bringing to that page do what you want them to do when you're spending any kind of money on marketing or bringing traffic to it. And then next up, another really big one is just to keep up with competition. Constantly things are changing, and that is the same for competition. Not only is your industry potentially changing a lot in this digital age, but also that your competitors are keeping up with trends just as much as you're trying to, right? So you've got to stay on top of things, and one of the best ways to do that is to conduct regular audits, because that helps you and enables you to adapt to this changing world of consumer preference preferences are always changing. There's emerging trends constantly. It seems like every day we hear about something new. And then also just stay on top of industry best practices. And by conducting CRO audits, it's a really great way to do that, because you're constantly looking at your competitors and what they're doing, and they're looking at you. And it's honestly, it's very important to conduct CRO audits just to keep up with your competition and the needs of your target audience as well. And then lastly, so a CRO audit relies on data, which we'll get into here in a minute, and analytics to identify these areas of improvement. And really the idea behind that, and the whole idea behind CRO audits, is if you're going to make changes, you want to make sure those decisions are being made and driven by that data. So as we all know, data is incredibly valuable, and a CRO audit is all about identifying, using data to identify pain points, to identify friction, to identify potential improvements, and really helps us make informed decisions and prioritize, potential optimizations and decisions that we could potentially make using data. So now we're going to get into how to conduct a CRO audit. So I've talked a lot about why we need to be doing them, but the first step here is to gather all the relevant data. This could be analytics, this could be heat maps, user recordings. We'll get into it here in a second, but there's a lot that goes into a CRO audit that brings all that value, right? You have to start by making sure you have the necessary access to the data, whether that's Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, heat mapping and user recording tools, the potential for user testing, and just making sure that you have access to all of that is honestly just the first step. And then making sure that you have enough volume for potential, testing down the line, and then you can really begin to evaluate and identify those trends once you have all that access. So that's really just the first step there. So we're going to start here with quantitative data collection. And I've listed a couple of things here that I like to look at, that I include in my audits. And also, this is a high level list, right? There's a lot of potential data points and things you can look at here, but I wanted to kind of cover as many as I could. First here is conversion, identification, and tracking. So once you've got that access, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten into clients' analytics and realized they're not tracking what they need to track. So clearly defining what the primary conversion actions and goals and objectives that you want your users to be doing when they get to your site is incredibly important. So getting that access and making sure that your conversions are identified, you know what you want to be tracking, and from there that it actually is being tracked. That is so important. Next up is audience insights. So, really this is just an idea of demographics. For example, age, gender, geography, location, languages, new versus returning visitors, bounce rates. Really here we're looking to paint a picture of the current landscape to kind of serve as the baseline that will inform what you look at down the line. And next up, we want to look at user behavior flow. So how are people moving through your site? How are users, going from point A to point conversion? Understanding the user journey and what potential pain points you might want to look at, where they drop off, where they abandon the conversion process, what percentage of people make it from the first page that they land on to conversion, and where do they drop off at each step. So entrances, exits, popular pages in the funnel, bounce rates, drop-offs, pages per session, session duration, things like that are really what go into user behavior flow here. And yeah, we're just trying to get an understanding of the conversion funnel to better evaluate where potential weak points are, where we want to kind of focus our efforts for the audit. And then also we want to look at devices and browsers. We want to see whether users are interacting with your website or, campaign, landing page, what have you, whether that's on a mobile device or desktop, because that's really going to inform what you should look at as far as functionality, how things are showing, whether they're showing correctly, and so you can see what users are actually, how they interact with your site by knowing what the device and browser they're using is. And then you want to check, how the website or the landing page, shopping cart, whatever it is, performs on different devices. So sometimes mobile has not been prioritized, or there might be some issues on desktop that aren't on mobile, or vice versa. You can use a tool like Browser Stack, for example, to see how the experience actually shows and is to interact with on actual devices through a tool like that. Definitely recommend using one of those. So next up is page load times. This is a big one as well. We all hate when pages take forever to load. So assess the loading speed of those key pages. Identify where areas of improvement are here. Are there little changes that could be made to reduce the time it takes to load a page? All right. So this last one is definitely very important. It's a little bit of a mix between quantitative and qualitative. Heat maps really provide an insight into those high-level trends with your users. So we look at things like scroll depth, click heat maps. A lot of these tools have user recordings, which I will mention here in a minute. But really, we want to, potentially see what content users are or are not seeing. So that's the scroll depth or attention maps. Click heat maps can show us things like, what users are clicking on that maybe aren't clickable but should be potentially. So that's an opportunity to see if user experience can be improved by looking at these different heat maps, which sort of aggregate data together to show us these trends. So with heat maps, I really recommend you having enough data and getting it set up and letting that data sort of stew for a bit and come in and collect. You want to look at a page that has at least 400 to 600 minimum visits before you kind of pull any insights from a heat map. All right, so next up, we're going to look at some qualitative data collection items here. So
this is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing. It helps us a bunch. Now back to the episode.
First up, we are going to want to identify key pages. Now this is kind of a step that is included in the sort of quantitative data collection phase, and you're gonna want to look at those quantitative data sources to identify your key pages. But I wanted to put it here because it really is a very important first step for this qualitative data collection journey. It's a primary focus and a first step because you've got to know what your most important pages are that your users are interacting with along your funnel. For example, if users are starting on the home page and then going to a product page and then looking at details and then from there adding it to their cart and checking out, you want to know that those are your key pages. And I'll get back to that. I'll kind of circle back there in a minute, but very important first step here to identify that funnel and understand what you want to look at going down to the end of the funnel. So next up, this is really where the heuristic analysis comes into play. So taking a methodical approach to evaluating the site or the landing page, shopping cart for functionality, clarity, trustworthiness, content organization, persuasion, messaging, all of those things. Using a methodical approach to do that is just really the best way to go about it. It's the best way to look at usability and UX as a whole. And here you're just trying to assess the overall usability and user experience of the website. So that would include navigation, menus, layout, what the content actually is. Is it high quality content? What are the call to actions? Where are they placed? Are they, ideal locations or are they hard to find? Page hierarchy, content hierarchy, things like that. I highly recommend actually going through the conversion funnel as yourself, as your users would. The goal is to ID any friction points that could be contributing to frustration or potential exits, abandonment, any weaknesses or functionality issues, and potential, micro conversions as well that you may want to track, but that you aren't currently. You might identify those in this process as well. And you really want to look at your key pages in this process and ask yourself the questions that you would as a user and that your users might be asking. Try to be objective. It can be really easy whether you're looking at your website or a client's website that you know really well. It can be really easy to kind of get stuck in the, well, I know what this is about, so my users know what this is about, but that's not true. You want to make sure that you are educating your users, things are clear, things like that. So try to be objective. It can be difficult, but yeah, definitely want to be objective in this step and really evaluate things from a user-centric perspective. All right, so next up, another really important step, competitor analysis. So as I mentioned before, the competitive landscape is always changing, industry landscape's always changing. Understanding how you or your clients' competitors are approaching CRO and approaching optimizations, things they're changing about their website, is really going to aid you in identifying potential opportunities or best practices. Keeping sort of a laser focus on competitors will really, really help in just identifying things you could be doing. Even if they don't fit, you could maybe, edit them or change them to fit your, needs, but really just keeping an eye on competitors and doing a thorough analysis of what they are doing that you are not, and identifying whether that's a good opportunity for you or not, or for your client or not, is a really good practice in this step as well. So next up, a really, really important one is content and messaging as well. So I've mentioned this a little bit before, but persuasion tactics are incredibly important. So you really want to examine the quality, the relevance of the content on the page or the website. It needs to align with what the user intent is and also encourage conversions. Is there, any messaging in your marketing that you are not matching on your website or landing pages? Is there one message being sent in an ad that just doesn't match with your brand tone? You want to check for that consistent messaging, that one-to-one match or at least close match of ad and brand messaging, to just keep things consistent. Users are very easily influenced most of the time, whether consciously or subconsciously, and messaging is incredibly important because of that. Persuasion tactics are sometimes hit or miss, and by taking a close look at your content and messaging and really taking stock of that during the audit is very important, because that gives you a sort of idea of where the gaps are in that messaging and where you could potentially improve your persuasion tactics. Credibility and trust factors are also incredibly important. Users want to know that your website is trustworthy and that their information or their money is going into good hands. There's a ton of buzz in every industry right now about privacy and data collection and, from users, and so you need to assess whether your website, your client's website, landing page, whatever it might be, is utilizing the necessary security measures and trust signals to make sure that your users, there aren't any moments of that dissonance of, I don't trust this website. I don't, is it got the little lock symbol in the browser? Some people look for that. Are there awards badges, certifications, privacy disclaimers? Can I trust this company in what I'm buying from them, in the information I'm giving them, things like that? So you want to make sure that you're sending those signals to your users that you are credible and trustworthy. So during the audit, check for those factors, and those are going to be industry specific a lot of times. So obviously different ones will be relevant for different clients, different websites, different organizations. So keep that in mind, but definitely want to make sure you check for that, because users are very concerned with their privacy and their information, and it'll be safe. So definitely want to keep that in mind and check that during an audit. So as I mentioned before, another really big one is user recordings. So with heat maps, most of those tools come with the ability to have user recordings included in your plan. So user recordings are a way to delve deeper into how visitors interact with your site. Most tools that provide heat maps will offer user recordings, as I mentioned. The best part, though, is that you'll be able to filter those recordings out by friction level, friction events, source, location, duration, and a lot of other factors. And this is a really, really invaluable resource of qualitative data. You just need to make sure that you're not spending hours and hours and hours poring over individual, thousands of individual recordings. Use the filters to your advantage and find those pain points. The heat maps are really good for that aggregate data. User recordings are really good for identifying those specific situations and friction points, that you might be missing if you just look at the heat maps. So next up is user testing. I saved best for last. User testing is one of the most invaluable tools you should have in your arsenal. There are a few different tools you can use to do user testing. I like UserFeel, but basically user testing involves recruiting real people to interact with your site and complete, predetermined tasks that you set answering your questions, narrating their experiences the whole time. So you'll be able to designate the specific parameters of users that you're looking for, whether that's location, age, demographic factors like that, based on your needs. And these can be 20 minutes to an hour, whatever you select or want. But either way, you're going to get a wealth of information that is just so valuable. I highly recommend user testing, and you will not regret it. It's not too expensive either. It's pretty low cost compared to other potential ways of getting this type of information. So definitely utilize user testing if possible in a CRO audit. It will help so much to kind of inform and validate what you're looking at for the rest, throughout the rest of the audit as well. So highly recommend user testing for sure. So now it's time to kind of compile findings, develop an action plan to move forward. What are your recommendations? You've done all this work to kind of gather this data information. So now you want to tell it in a way, in a sort of story to say, here's where we are, here's where we could be, and here's how we get there. So once you've summarized your findings, you'll want to also include your suggested optimizations. So share what recommendations as far as best practices or optimizations that you don't necessarily need to test. There are some things that don't require testing that you can just implement. They're kind of no-brainers that are just industry best practices that will always increase conversion rate, or always, a good thing to do. So for example, making your site secure with an SSL certificate. That's something you don't need to test. If that isn't already on your site or on your client's site, we can assume that that is something you just need to go ahead and do. What is and isn't best practice or industry no-brainer, things like that, I'd recommend doing your research beforehand. Things are not always what they seem when it comes to testing, as many of you may know. Things like a sticky CTA on mobile might seem like a no-brainer, but sometimes they're really good to test anyway, because you never know. If it's a really big change, I would recommend testing it. But you kind of have to subjectively decide that based on the client, based on your situation, your organization, whether it's something that you would want to test or not. But things like an SSL, certificate, you should definitely go ahead and do that, right? If it's missing. Next up, so recommend some A/B tests if your traffic and conversion volumes allow for it. So use something like the CXL testing calculator to decide whether that is something that would work for your client or for you with the level of traffic and conversion volume you have. You definitely need enough to be able to test. But you always want to identify some potential tests that could be run. One of the reasons we do CRO audits is to identify ways to improve conversion rates and then validate with an experiment so that we can make those data-driven decisions. If testing is not an option, though, you could do a before and after analysis by benchmarking your metrics before you make a change and after, potentially a year later or 6 months later, something like that, if you aren't able to do a CRO test. So next up, you want to prioritize by the highest impact to the lowest impact. So your recommendations that you make should be sort of prioritized in this manner so that you can sort of hit those low-hanging fruit right off the bat, those high impact changes or tests that will sort of prove the value of CRO, prove the value of the audit, and improving conversion rates quickly. Never a bad thing, right? So hit those high impact changes first and prioritize them first, because a lot of the times a CRO audit is sort of that gateway into moving into testing or just optimization in general. So as I wrap up here, I wanted to share some key takeaways. First off, if you're running tests, whether it's internally for your organization or your clients, you've got to be doing them regularly. You've got to be doing audits regularly. They are a vital piece of any CRO program, any testing or experimentation program. Your industry is always changing, most likely, and so is the digital landscape. So making sure that you're doing audits regularly are going to help you sort of keep up with that. It doesn't need to be a full audit all the time when you're doing them regularly, but having those metrics that are KPIs for you, having those, maybe yearly, annually, or semi-annually user testing to make sure that there's nothing you're missing, things like that. Just keep it regular, and just that constant evaluation is key. And when you do anything regularly, you've got to establish a methodology and a process. So highly recommend having a repeatable or somewhat repeatable process. Not only does it make audits easier for you and your team, but it also ensures you don't leave anything on the table that could potentially be providing you value, increasing conversion rates, and your bottom line. So establish that process, establish a methodology, and that regular schedule, and audits will be your best friend. Don't underestimate user testing. So as I said, it is invaluable. It's a great way to validate your findings as well as inform you of things that you may not have thought of or may not have identified throughout your heuristic analysis or other qualitative factors or even your quantitative. Take advantage of this often low-cost practice and resource. Lastly, audits are pure value. Leverage them. A CRO audit is often the gateway or tool that we use to help clients understand and grasp the value of conversion rate optimization. And if it's relevant for them, if they have the volume, A/B testing is usually soon to follow from there. If you have a client that's on the fence about testing, or you're on the fence about testing, leveraging a CRO audit to really understand the value that could be being left on the table could really help get the conversation started and show that value and potential very quickly, just by doing an audit and being like, wow, we didn't even see that. So whether it's for you or your clients, definitely, just try an audit, see what happens. Guarantee you it won't be bad. So I thank you for listening to me. Again, I'm a senior CRO strategist at Verifone. Here is my contact information, LinkedIn, if you have any questions. But yeah, that's my time. I hope you found this overview helpful. I just want to thank you again for your time. And again, feel free to reach out. And yeah, I want to also give a big thank you to Rommel and everyone at Experiment Nation. So thanks, everyone. Have a great one.
This is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing.